Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zaki. Thank you for the introduction. May I share the screen right away? I think
Yes.
so.
Yep.
You have allowed me. Okay.
Yep.
So we can start from there. There you go. Is it coming out there in your screen?
Yeah. Loud and clear. Yep.
Okay, good. Well, as the introduction already indicate in terms of my talk somehow, because it's also will mainly based on my recent research in the last almost 6 years, I think. I've been doing this topic since January. I still remember it is actually started in the New Year's Eve of January 2015. And at the time I was in Bandung in the West Java, Indonesia. The idea came from there, New Year's Eve, walking around in the city, preparing for the commemorating the Asian African Conference for the 60-year commemoration at the time. All right, but before that, allow me to ask you, especially in this room, in this digital environment, just want to know everyone here. I'm now speaking, sitting in the most eastern part of Jogja, not in my parents-in-law house. Just fresh graduate from my hotel quarantine in Jakarta, and now I'm speaking in Jogja. So I'm in my time now. I'm following the West Indonesian time. I think it's the same with every one of you in Surabaya, but I will not assume that every one of you are now sitting in Surabaya. So may I know where are you now, just to understand the space and time? Of course, Mas Iga is speaking in Surabaya, or are you in Bali, Derawan Island, or Raja Ampat?
I'm in Sidoarjo. Well, it's a remote city of Surabaya.
Okay. Hello, Sabrina, following from Manila in the Philippines. Nice. Nice to meet you. Anyone else? Especially the one are not in the same time zone. I always like to start this by asking the participant in general, because we all realize that now we do this thing. This is also part of the topic of the creativity, how actually our understanding of time and space are actually squeezed. But at the same time, we also have to realize that everyone might have a different environment, different climate. Even though I wear a jacket right now, it's very, of course, like in Surabaya, it's warm and humid. But I also want to know that how is in Manila, how is in Sidoarjo. So now we can getting together, even though we have sitting in the different time zone, or maybe or different space and place, but we could get the understanding together, and we can continue to share our experience, not only from my side, but also from your side. So today in this invitation, thank you very much for the invitation, Mas Iga, Mas Irvan, and also all the crew in this series. I was just getting this topic, exploring creative city, and explore is actually unlimited or giving an infinite possibilities, right? The term itself, creative city, is somehow become established nowadays. I believe you all, those who are also following Mas Iga and colleague in UNER, have already discussed this as the concept itself. So today talk, I will take the focus on the other angle of still on the creative city, and I maintain the plural of the term, not just to show many cities, but also to show different meanings conceptually and might also theoretically from this term. So what makes the alternative voices in creative cities matter? That's my position to start with. And my standpoint, of course, it's also show my expertise, while at the same time, it actually shows my limitation. This is my contact detail and my affiliation. I'm currently also lecturer and researchers and still continue my research affiliate. I used to be a former senior lecturer in Lund University in the southernmost part of Sweden. And now I'm back to Yogyakarta, but it doesn't change my research area or the field. It's still urban media and communication, and also visual culture, film studies, that also part of it. That's why we intersect that with Mas Iga in that sense. But my perspective is also specific from the critical media studies, cultural studies, and also post-colonial studies. When it comes to methodological approaches, mostly qualitative approach, of course. But even though qualitative approach itself have a very broad type of method, I myself also have a limitation in terms of my ability, mainly the textual analysis, including semiotic analysis, and recently also on using sensory methodologies and ethnography. Maybe next time we can discuss that further about this if you are interested in this kind of methodological approach. In terms of cultural and geographical focus, even though I'm talking about Southeast Asian creative city, I'm mainly focusing culturally on those who are having a Malay-based cultural expression, not just in the language, but also in the history, in the culture. So that's why so far it's limited in the Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. But I'm willingly to see and learn from other country as well and other culture in this region. It's mainly due my limitation on that. And I use my Instagram. It's also part of my methodological approach, especially in the visual aspect. So you might also take a look and in terms of the way in which I use that and the way in which I connect with my informant. That's also part of this talk and this presentation. Specifically for today's talk, it's mainly based on the following three work from my previous work. One is the journal article in Continuum on Bookcraft and Vintage Suitcase. It's dealing with the issue of media practice in the creative collective in Bandung, Indonesia. And the other work is a book chapter in this edited volume, quite interesting. If you are really interested, this is a very, very brand new, just released in November 2020. So in terms of academic book, it's still very much really, really new. And the Reimagining Creative City in 21st Century Asia, it's focusing on the idea of creative city, both in practice and discourse, specifically in Asia, seen from the Asian scholars. So even though there are a sense of kind of a politics of knowledge, but it's actually a kind of adding a variety of it. I'm writing about Malaysia in this chapter, while other chapter talk about the case in Taiwan, in Korea, but of course, not just the K-pop, because Korea also have other creative industry. So they mainly talk about something that is somehow neglected or not getting any much attention as much as any other work. So that would be a good edited volume if you're interested. Don't worry about the work. I have provided the list of the further reading. I will share it to Mas Iga later on, then he can distribute and share it to you later on. So don't worry if you cannot find it from my limited slide like this. And then the last one, it's my recently published book based on my doctoral research, Creative Voices of the City. This is the whole book, the monograph, writing about the whole case in Malaysia and Indonesia, speaking about the context of creative city scenes from the point of view of urban media and communication. Further on, I will start with this experience first before we move to more conceptual or theoretical. I will call it 1 step a day during my field research. Allow me to read my ethnographic vignette. On one day, in between my visit to my informant groups in Bandung, in the West Java, Indonesia, among other things, there is a program in this city has been materialized through the establishment of the Bandung Creative Hub. This is the picture of Bandung Creative Hub, the building compound that was established in December 2017. The notion of a creative hub here is institutionalized by the state through the visible material of physical infrastructure, structure plans, grand ideas and feasibility, and also strict regulation. But among other things, I also witnessed a lack of mutual and sustainable engagement with the relevant social actors. Observing the spatial and social practice in this compound of Bandung Creative Hub, I noted at least three issues. First, the institutionalization of creative places, such as this one, has been designed with a very top-down approach. The voice of the state, including their consultant on urban planning, urban design, is by far the most prominent. Second issue, it's about the notion of hub itself, because hub here is perceived as an axis that serves the need of the state rather than addressing the needs of the creative institution, and the innovation and implementation of creative practices within the city. What I've seen, most of the visitors I observed sat alone, a few in small groups using laptop or other mobile devices to take advantage of the free wireless internet connection this building provides. And then come the third problem or the third issue. And this is the most visible and obvious one. Bandung Creative Hub explore the notion of creativity in a very superficial manner. The building is filled on some floors to a quite excessive level, as you can see from the photograph here, with both illustrative, colorful, and ornamental murals, paintings, inspirational typography, and other figurative symbols. All of these are scattered across all levels of the building without a particular connecting theme or even artistic style, and of course, accompanied by excessive warning sign, mostly of this kind, don't do this, don't do that type, the dilarang signs. So from this ethnographic vignette, what I want to say is there are, of course, an obvious built environments and manifestation of the structural plan of becoming creative city. And we cannot deny that. If Bandung is also self-proclaimed as a creative city, they can do so. The city can do so because the local government create that in a very physical form. But what I try to argue here that this built environment and the, I use the term simply creative look, or I borrow the sociologist term from Ulrich tourist gaze, that actually what they build is actually just following what actually other people want to see rather than what exactly the creativity within the city. And as we know, those who are familiar with the Indonesian history, Bandung, way before becoming a creative city, it's already a creative city. People from Bandung and as any other city, like maybe Surabaya, Jakarta, Malang, or Yogyakarta, it's already part of the creative movement. The people, it's already part of the creativity, and they do that not just for a livelihood, but also for any other thing. So from this example, what I want to also stress about that, especially with the last one, the symbolic aspect of dilarang, or don't do this and don't do that, is actually remind me of something. Well, if we're going back to the very idea of creative and being creative or creativity, limitation and restriction will never ever be part of that. But here, symbolically, to me as an ethnographer, it's interesting because then you can see that even within the very building as the kind of the foreground of the creative city, they still use this kind of ideas, expression that is actually contrasting with the creative meaning itself. So I want to actually invite you from this tiny example from Bandung. Maybe you can think or remember, or maybe you ever pass a city, not necessarily have to be your own city. Maybe you can get the similar idea in your own city. If so, just write it down in the chat. I will address that later on. Just write it down, which city and what you see and how you feel that is actually similar with this experience in Bandung, that it looks creative, but actually there is a question mark inside. So this example is actually leading to that. Feel free to just chat. I think everyone can use the feature of chat, right, Mas Iga?
Yeah, everyone can use
Of course, yeah. Feel free to put that while listening to me, and then maybe you remember I've been into that city, and then I see that. So just type shortly, briefly, the city, the name of the city, and what do you see, and what is actually the question mark in terms of the creativity. And also throughout this talk, that will be explanation, and my talk will be accompanied by these visuals. This is a photograph that I made that will be part of the data itself, and the way I also use that visual data as part of the way I build my own argument in this particular aspect. In terms of more theoretical standpoint, I'm in detail, as I already introduced earlier, I'm coming from the media practice approach rather than the political economy, for example, or rather than from the policy studies. Even though creative city, of course, can be seen from policy studies, I'm not coming from the area. So I will talk about policy, but not analyzing the policy or not making any judgment on the policy. Policy becomes just a context. My attention on the practice, people practice especially, because in media practice, the question is not what media do to the people or what actually the effect of the way people use media, but the question is what actually people do and make of with media. And media here, it have a very broad meaning, not just the mass media, but also in our current time, media is interlinked between one form to another. It's not just a technological platform, but also social, but also spatial. So in a very broad meaning. And then this is a unique one. Even though I'm Mas Irfan, Mas Iga, and I myself also belong to a department of communication and media. In this particular research, I'm coming from non-media centric media approach, looking at the media as something that it's not just the media, understanding the media and the city. In this case, I need to understand the broad situation. I cannot just study the media, the content, or the political economy. I need to understand the whole situation in this creative city. So that's my theoretical standpoint. Another specific theoretical standpoint, especially this is maybe also quite interesting for you all when talking about the city, it's the way we see the city as a concept. The city as a concept, I mostly rely on Henri Lefebvre idea on the triadic dimension of the city, because if we see the city as just like this blue silhouette, the city as a built environment, including like our event poster, it's also a silhouette of a city. We always think cognitively and unconsciously, or maybe subconsciously, that city is always about built environment that is contrast with the agricultural based environment. Yes, could be, but that's just the material city. In any other level, theoretically, the city can be also the imagine, like creative city, how we imagine city. The imagine, sometimes it's also on the idea of vision, of people interactions, and sometimes also on the policy. When it already become the policy, of course, it's become the material again. Then come the third aspect, it's called the lived city. The city itself, it's meaningful for the people who live within the city. The meaningful for people who passing by the city as a tourist, as a passerby. So how the city is understood, it's supposed to be from this triadic dimension of the city. If we cannot combine this, I think it will be problematic, because we only see the city as a material. So we will just develop the physical infrastructure. If we think that the imagine, then we only have a vision, but we forget the real or the live, something like that. And also, it's, to me, it's in specific, it is also important for our topic, looking at the creative city. And this is my other argument, that this theoretical standpoint, especially looking from the lived city, lead me to see cities for people, cities not only for profit. Here, profit means economical and financial profit for a small amount or small group of people only. So from that two aspect of theoretical standpoint in this particular phenomenon of creative city, I also have a limitation. I cannot understand the creative city as a whole phenomenon. It will be too big. So I limit myself looking from the holistic contextualization informed by mostly a social anthropologist, looking at the from the point of view of ethnographic work, managing between my present or closeness and distance. And then also I combine that with the visual aspect. That's why I use, at the time, I also use my small camera to make a photo documentation. So I'm the one behind the camera taking a picture, not as an artist, but as a social researcher. So I used my camera as my other eye and also my other mouth, because it's also about process of understanding and asking sometimes, especially to document the hidden or unnoticed, the live culture as part of the live city. So in that sense, I put everything on my backpack during the fieldwork. Luckily, it was way before the pandemic. I cannot imagine if my field research happened in the pandemic, that will be only Zoom image or something. So so I had a good experience in terms of meeting with people, seeing the city, understanding it from these two combined methodologies. If you are, I just want to show it as a kind of an inspiration if you want to see the phenomenon from more academic point of view. So it doesn't matter that, of course, you have your own standpoint, theoretical and methodological, but if so, this is like kind of like the process when you can also hopefully can get an inspiration in terms of designing your own research or project or anything. So from that point of view, in my case, I use two approaches, ethnography and visual methodology, from the qualitative tradition, looking at the media and creative practices in cities. And then in terms of method, combining, of course, since it is a long project, I had good chances to testing out with a plenty of method. But if you have a limited time, then you can focusing with one or two or combination or two or maximum in terms of that. So I combine between the photo documentation on the visual aspect and the combination of many aspects, from the sensory to the remote observation and also interview. Well, having that kind of tools and social and theoretical understanding at the cities, what I have seen in the beginning, initially, of course, I start from the policy document. From the policy document, I kind of like having a more question mark. Then I walk this city. I was following the idea of Michel de Certeau, the everyday life theories, walking the city. And then also remind me of the practice of Walter Benjamin in the arcade, walking in Paris. And I just walk in Bandung and then try to walk in Georgetown, Penang, Malaysia, because I got the information that these two cities just become an emerging creative city. What happened with the city? Well, in Bandung, as I said earlier, with this example of Creative Hub, everything is so colorful. Everything has a good new vibe kind of thing. But is it really that? How about the expression of the people who live within the city, who have done the creative work? And then from there, long story short, I managed to make a group of people that I call here the Creative Collective. They are a group, not just one or two persons, a group that is designed, but it's not a community. It's a small group. It's not also organization or institution. So they are kind of like loosely grouped. They focus with their own activities, creative activity, I mean. And in Georgetown, I managed to focus on these 4 creative collective that coincidentally also reside in one building compound. There are Poco things working with the woodcraft, creating a workshop on woodworking and also making a furniture in their own style and design. And then Wish Concept focusing on handmade, on the right corner, handmade accessories made from more sustainable material. And then there are the third creative collective named Graphic District Solution, using the exact, like the designer, they try to make a typo intentionally, so the people will notice that, and then the name. So they learn about, they create an open forum for young graphic designer and animator. And then the Hinbas Depot, the name of the compound is Hinbas Depot, but this one is Hinbas Depot as the art management who organize the place, create a art gallery and so on. And then in the other city in Bandung, I managed to meet four other collective named Tobuchil. It used to be the name Tobuchil and Club. They just rebrand themselves, become Tobuchil, focusing on the craft activity, craft store, as well as craft workshop. Kineruku, alternative library, and lately they also have an online shop in terms of vintage online shop, and a cafe. Omnium, it used to be a bookshop and music. Now they tend to focus more as a independent music support or independent music ecosystem. So they provide merchandise and also advice for indie label and also indie music group to use that. So they kind of like create an ecosystem, something like that. And then Omnispace, the youngest one, it's actually an art collective, visual art collective, consists of several young emerging visual artists from Bandung. And then they want to have their own open gallery run in a very completely different manner than the commercial gallery. So they are mostly more about exploration of aesthetic work. So I'm focusing on that creative collective. Of course, it's a matter of choice. Of course, plenty other collective in both city. I just want to make not necessarily comparisons, but actually make a point to support each other, because it's not apple to apple. They have their own different history of the city. They have the different context, and also the activity of the creativity. It's also different. But the similarities or groups is actually an independent collective, never work with the formal agency of the UNESCO, as well as never work and involve with the local government formally. And they tend to be on the outside of the system. So that's the similarities. So, and then I call it fully the independent creative collective. Let's give you a hint of the city itself, the context of the city. Georgetown, for you not coming from Malaysia or not familiar with this small town, it is located in the Penang Island outside of the Semenanjung, Malaysia, and it's known as a cultural hub in the last 500 years due to the colonial system of the become the port during the colonial time, and then become the manufacturing industry, and then they face an economic decline in the 70s, and then they embrace the idea of creative hub, and then they realize they have a potential to become a cultural heritage, and eventually, along with Malacca in 2008, UNESCO acknowledged them as part of World Heritage Site. Having that global or international recognition have, of course, a consequence that they need to maintain that. And the way they maintain that by making a city branding based on the creative focus, especially having the national context after a year after in the Malaysia itself. At the time, the government create the National Creative Industry Policy, or Dasar-Dasar Industri Kreatif Negara. And then according to this policy, one out of the three main core group of the creative aspect, or they use the term creative industry, are also about heritage. So Georgetown somehow having this international recognition, at the same time also having a national support. Of course, after the pandemic, I'm not sure, I haven't followed yet in terms of whether this policy it's still become a priority for the government, especially nationally. But in Georgetown itself, they do have this kind of character that they want to have a different trajectory of development and modernity, somehow different with Kuala Lumpur or the capital. But again, within the city itself, there are plenty of tension. Like this image, for example, from this collected from the fieldwork, that now with the creative initiative, there are plenty of initiative using a street art, including inviting international visual artists like this one on the left, one of the famous one made by Lithuanian-born artist that was educated in London, Ernest Zakarevic, that somehow personally fall in love in the city, and then the government paid him or commissioned him to pay series of mural, and then the mural become sensational, and then attract global tourists. On the other hand, the city also have a very traditional community or Jati clan, the family of those who live quietly, having a different way of life compared to the city people in downtown. And now with the global tourists, they also have a tension that, as in the middle picture, the photograph, you can see that even from the local government, local people that want to say something against the global tourists. Jangan bising, be silent. I'm not sure the one that is written in Mandarin. Maybe anyone of you speak Mandarin. I don't speak Mandarin. I only understand a few Hokkien, not even a Cantonese. So it's usually written also in a mix between Malay expression and Hokkien, but not this one. But I believe because this is more about informing any tourist to be silent in this Jati clan. This is a community that they have a quieter way of living rather than in the downtown in the last 500 years. And then now come these tourists. On the other hand, also there are young people. They want to express using a different expression. They also read Banksy in the UK. They also understand modern art in the US, and also an art movement in Marseille in the southern part of France. So they want to embrace that idea. So what I want to say is actually in the city nowadays, this has become a crowded city. Yes, the creative city is a framework, but the way it is done is actually have a different voices. The government want this, the traditional community want differently, and the young creative people have their own ideas. So they are juxtaposed, like this symbolically said in this photograph, the juxtapose of cultural practice, the juxtapose of different social realities, and also the juxtapose of subtle tension and diverse voices. Similar, like in Georgetown, the Bandung also have a same key concept in terms of creative city and creative hub. The difference is they start not with the cultural heritage specifically, but they want to create themselves to become a creative city, especially in the section of city of design. And they finally get it in 2015, I guess. Yeah. When they become part of UNESCO Creative Cities Network. Again, with this international recognition come the consequences. Of course, from the point of the local government and the state point of view, they want to embrace it fully. But again, the formulation of creative city in global situation also change. But they keep following the formula, while at the same time, the national context, they have this attention on the creative economy. And creativity is always seen from the point of view of Jakarta as an aspect to make a profit or economic development. And they're institutionalized by the blueprint during the SBY administration, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono administration, and then followed by Joko Widodo administration by the institutionalization of Badan Ekonomi Kreatif or the Indonesian creative economy. Even though in his second term, he kind of like, okay, this is not the priority anymore. They just put into the administration into part of the ministry again, and losing the new power of the institutional independent institutionalization. What I want to say from here is actually the same. Like in Bandung, like in Georgetown, Bandung also have a different phases even after gaining the international recognition. Yes, indeed, like in the left, right? Way before or years before they gain this international recognition as UNESCO Creative City, the city has become creative in terms of design, including the clothing company, the design of fashion. They create their own font. Even the main road like this one in Trunojoyo Street become the distro street, the distribution outlet street. But of course, in the recent years, they face difficulties in terms of tension, new challenge from the online marketplace and so on. And at the same time, real challenge in terms of landlord, because they don't own the place. It's owned by a landlord. And somehow the landlord also related to the military power. This is Bandung. So it creates a new tension. On the other hand, the everyday life in the street also show a juxtapose of a different cultural practice and different social realities. So subtle tension, even though it's not maybe openly spoken, but the tension are there. While it's also show there will be a possibility of diverse voice. My attention as a scholars looking at this diverse voice because it's also important in the way we understand creative city. Because I'm afraid that if we see creative city as some kind like a tools just for the economic development only, I'm not against that kind of view. But if that the only view to achieve the label of creative city, then we forget the previous theoretical positioning and also ethical position that cities for the people, cities not for the profit. So in that sense, my research, long story short, with all this combination of method, I collect what I call as alternative voice. In this particular talk, there are 3 types of voices. Of course, plenty of other voices. Even within my you can read my book if you want to see a more complete. But the one that is relevant here, at least there are 3 voices. One is about the network of people. Using the media in general, the technology, social media, the social media beyond the digital, I mean like the real social media, and then it's actually a tools that they use for a pragmatic aspect from all my studied collective. But the most important thing that like this quote coming to informant that whatever they do in their everyday life dealing with the media is actually the assemblage of practices, a combination, a connected of practices that could lead to the creativity. It's not just about making something. Creativity is also about maintaining the social setting that actually create a good vibe of environment to make something. So I believe like what other scholars like David Gauntlett write in book Making is Connecting, he argued that understanding creativity with 2 aspects, people born with the creative aspect, he said no. And then secondly, creativity is about product. He said also no. Creativity is about process. So starting from that understanding that creativity is about process, including in the city, I start to understand the process of the people who work within the creative milieu and see what kind of process that is actually important for them. And one of them is actually social setting, how they create everyday practice using the technology, using the media, using the social network, and using their own place to build their kind of process. So in that sense, creative city, it's also about the process of the people who work within that city, whatever their milieu, whatever their work. So that's how I understand this from this research. On this voice, also about the idea that how do they deal the tension? How do they deal with this juxtapose of diverse voices in the city? And actually, all my collective, they are not coming from more overt protest social activists. They do have some kind of hesitation, complaint, and everything, but it's so subtle. That's why I argue that in my book, the way they express their protest, complaint, disappointment, and everything, without an overt protest is actually a subtle resistance using a pragmatic and organic ways in their everyday life. How it is done, for example, like this quote from a visual artist and co-founder of an art collective. He said, I quote, "This is the place where everyone can make mistake." Yes, actually it is like that. While we are here, let's make any mistake as much as possible. That's how he usually invite people to join in this collective. He continues, because in some places, making mistakes are somehow impossible. So here we feel freer. Also, we have pleasant experiences and joys in doing things. Of course, as a collective, we want to have a long life. Because as some friends ever said to us, a space like this shows that there is still a hope. If we and other similar spaces are gone, the hope for all of us and for the future artists will also be gone. I think this and the quote. I think this quote is all from this interview. It's also important beyond his milieu in the visual artist and the artist. It's also in the creativity itself. To me, it's also speak on the idea that the way they show their resistance by keeping their place, no matter it's hard, no matter they don't have a what we say support from the formal support from the local government or from the commercial sponsor, they want to maintain this. This is like in other quote, other informants said they want to keep their collective as a breathing space in the city, because the city is so crowded, not just literally but symbolically, because everyone just busy with their own ideas. So our collective is a breathing space, she said. So leading to the next voice, this kind of understanding of social setting, it's also led me to understand how actually in their environment, understanding the use of material object, it's also important to understand how the people within the creative city having their own meaning of being creative, and also having a city, whatever the label made by the government or international recognition, this is the one that they want to maintain. In this case, I make a subtitle of On Material Object, Conviviality, and Subtle Resistance. Subtle resistance have been mentioned earlier in terms of the example, but it's actually all start with the material object. I have one example here about the use of tote bag. In my analysis, I use the term tote bag queue. How actually in any groups, this one it's in Georgetown and it's also happened in Bandung, the use of fabric tote bag become a sensitive object, become a communicative object. And the way they balance closeness and distance, and I myself reflect on my own process as a researcher, I also maintain my closeness and distance using this symbolic object. For example, in the initial process of my fieldwork, I just use a regular backpack, and then I know nobody, and then it's hard to just to get along. And then I realized everyone there, most of the people use the fabric tote bag. In general, is actually just for the idea of environmentally concern. Yes, indeed. But somehow in detail, it's also have a role in what I call conviviality. Conviviality here, it's hard to translate it. Maybe in Bahasa Indonesia, some similar word is about kebersamaan. Correct me if I'm wrong. But in general, it's the idea that people sit together, not necessarily as part of organization, but because they feel the feeling of belonging, it's somehow rooted. And they share the idea together and they feel fine with that. So conviviality is the social capital to build another important aspect. And in my research, building the conviviality apart from building the social setting in everyday practice, it's also using the material object. This fabric tote bag is just one example as a board lingo. Another example that I also found even after the fieldwork is the use of the postcard story. The story behind this is my postcard that I sent to one of my informants as part of this kind of a research process, not even a research method initially. So I realized that most of my informants belong to a specific ethnic group and religions. So during particular moment after I returned back to Sweden, and then I sent a postcard during that particular moment, like say the end of Ramadan and during the Lunar New Year's, and then I just send the postcard. And I usually intentionally chose a unique postcard. Just this one is a postcard showing about the famous children's story and character in Sweden. So it's actually designed somehow creative, something like that. But at the time, my initial intention is just to maintain the relation with the informant, because I will meet them again. I will need to ask with them and so on and so on. What really surprised me is actually the way they treat my postcard. Coming back to the idea on conviviality and material object, having built a relation with my informant in the previous year and then the following year during the field research, my postcard, it's become more than just simply a material object. Yes, it has a creativity aspect, but it's not me who made it. I just bought it and then I sent it. But to them who has also a practice of sending postcard among themselves and also use the material object to say something. And then afterward, they post in their own Instagram and they share it to other friends as well. So the idea that, to me, it already speaks beyond the postcard. It is also about another voice that creativity can be very much coming from a very trivial and everyday life. But for them, it's really a matter of their life. This is an important aspect to maintain their network, to say something, to even to argue something, but in a subtle way. And at the end, going deeper and deeper, understanding their everydayness, making things. Of course, they make things for part of their livelihood, like the craft collective make things, like the art collective also open a gallery and so on. So it leads me to, why do they bother to keep doing this? Why do they continue there? Even though the official narrative will not recognize them anyway, they will not part of this UNESCO bling bling attention. But then they say that, sorry, my understanding that what they do is actually a labor of love. It's not just a romantic expression of labor of love, but it also have its roots in the idea that my argument that they also create a place as a kind of process of a special practice. So what I want to say is that whatever they do is actually from space to becoming a place. In the cultural geographical understanding, space is always an abstract thing, right? Ruang in Indonesian is something that is abstract and it has a tension within it, while place or tempat is actually, or wadah, sometimes it has more settled tone. So all the collective basically try to create their own place in the process of the social setting. Interaction is actually part of a process to become a place. Like one of the informants said, this collective, her collective, is like a place for sharing ideas. And that's why she preferred to call it as wadah. Another informant also mentioned that the collective has two meaning. First, since now I focus on the yarn business, this space has become my very place for the learning process about how to manage this as a business. Yes, because that's part of her livelihood. She continues. The other one is when I can teach people about knitting. Then they can create their own knitting business and doing good in their business. That satisfies me more. I can see the real impact of my teaching. If we use the creative industries framework, whether it's from the global agency like UNESCO or the state government or the national policy, no one will calculate this because this is an intangible aspect. No one can calculate how a creative like her can say that satisfy me more, looking at other people doing the knitting business good after they follow my workshop. How can we calculate that? Because this is intangible and it cannot be tangible. This is about feeling, about process. And coming back to the theory of creativity, I somehow believe that that's also important, that this kind of voice that is intangible, it's also important element of building block of creative city, because the framework of creative industry that we always calculate everything from the economical base somehow important. Yes, indeed, I believe that's important nationally, locally, maybe, or even globally, but it cannot stop there. We have other intangible element, and that's also part of the people everyday life in the city. So I'm going to end with this quote. It's interesting because like in any other creative industry framework in the study, theoretically as well as empirically, you can see that the speed is always important element. Creativity become new lucrative aspect of the economic development after manufacturing industry, transportation, and other business sector, because as long as we can make it quick in a big scale, and that will be a good benefit, then we can call it creative industry. But to the people that I study, they don't against the industry. I mean, like they don't say big no to this kind of creative industry. They just don't want to become that kind of ball. Even if they can somehow intersect with that kind of industry as an industry, they want to do it in their own way. For us, as I quote, making it easy. The hardest part is how to make others buying the idea we offer. But it's okay to be slow lah, using a Malay expression. The slowness here, yeah, for those who are familiar with that expression, you know. But I keep that expression because it also indicate the way they want to maintain their character, not individual character only, but also the collective character. And in a group, it's also about all my finding that the slowness here is not just talking about against the industrious way of doing things in scale, but it's more about looking that there is a possibility to see, to do, and to perceive the city that we love, the city that we live in, if whether we hate or love and hate relationship with our own city, but they can do in their own way and they maintain to do so. So by having said all of this argument in terms of the importance of alternative voice, what I want to say here as kind of like invitation for further discussion rather than a concluding statement, it's about the idea that I collect all the word and concept in creative city in many journal article and books, and usually we come up with this kind of word: creative class, creative culture, creativity, urban creativity, city on display, city policy. And if we put everything in the word cloud, it's somehow chaotic, and everyone can use that conceptually different, practically also different. But to me, looking at what the practice happened in Bandung and Georgetown and compare with other secondary data from other creative city in the region, that creative city, it become the policy and political economic drive that have pushed many emerging new cities and also old city to become new creative city into what I call as the creative city bandwagon. This is a trend, a formula. So the notion of creative city has become a discourse leading to any policies and practices in the creation of a single main narrative in the city. And this is practiced widely, even beyond the region. Outside of Southeast Asia, it's also happened actually. It also reminds me of an ethnologist named Orvan Lofgren. He wrote a lot about experience economy and also criticizing about the city branding. And he used the term that the city branding is also using the idea of catwalk, the catwalking city branding. Everything is glamour on the right carpet, but actually behind it, no one really care. So he criticized that. And other criticism from Jim McGuigan in Cool Capitalism, one of his interesting book, also arguing that many cities around the globe now tend to follow the global prescription. It become a prescription. To become a city is actually to become a creative city. So somehow it's become a prescription. But we can step backward a little bit. Should we follow this prescription? Do we really need this prescription? If we want to be a creative city, we want to define ourselves how to be a creative city. We want to include other diverse voices as well. So in that sense, if there are prescription that is actually forced to many other cities, not only in Indonesia, but also in the region of Southeast Asia, the various voices in the city then in many instances will be neglected. To me, such a tendency is indeed very problematic. That's how I see the idea of this creative city based on my empirical research and theoretical exploration. And thank you very much. Hope it's not too long. So this is my contact detail, and you can feel free to scan the QR code for more details explanation of what I've said based on my previous publication and any work that is openly available. All right. I think that will be all for now. And then I'm happy to invite anyone want to have any dialogue or Q&A or sharing. Oh, let me check. Some of you already respond in the chat. Mani Sidoarjo with the big. Thank you, Sabrina. War on drug. Where was it? It's like in the entrance yes. of the city.
Yes, war on drug.
Wow. What's the color? What's the color? What's the color of the typography? Because sometimes it's also interesting.
I think red.
Red.
Yeah, think so.
It says something, right? Politically.
But everywhere in the almost every corner of the city, it's bigger than any sign. So war on drug.
So there is a sign of Sidoarjo, but there is a bigger sign said war on drug. Yes. And there is no context of it, whether there is a program or reducing.
Oh, there's also like a big banners with the cops and military all together. Yeah, it's so creative, quote unquote. Thank you, Zaki. Anyone who has a question, could you please drop your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Feel free to do in Bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, if you want to say it in Tagalog, I need your help.
And
you are the moderator, Mas Iga. You are the moderator. So anyone want to ask in Surabayaan, then you need to translate it to me. And then if anyone want to say in Balinese, then
Mas Irfan, please.
Wow, it must be it's difficult. It's difficult question.
Suwun Mas Zaki.
Hello, hey.
Informasinya sangat menarik. Kok informasi sih? Ilmunya salah.
Pak Irfan, please speak in English, please.
Ya, awalnya ngomong bahasa Jawa campur. Tapi, oh iya Mas, aku arep nang Jogja tak mampir.
Siap. I'll be waiting.
Okay. Thank you for your very enlightenment presentation. And I think this is a very critical approach regarding the existence of city and how it can contribute as well into the understanding of how city evolve and respond to the changes. Maybe some slight comments regarding your current research and also ongoing research there. I know that you have done it for several years. How does this thing, or how did your findings level up with our current situation during pandemic, especially where people try to cope with their situations, where disruption is actually not only a discussion anymore, it's something that really happened into the society. And when we look at how you discuss about different cities, not only in Indonesia, but also in Malaysia and other countries, it also have benefited not only in terms of maybe some of it goes into the tourism, or people when they see it as someone who was visiting for tourist purpose or tourism purpose, or someone who lived there temporarily, or maybe more than they expected. I mean, because my field is in migration, so I think that many people that try to manifest their thinking into their places that they live. Like, for example, when you were living in Lund, Swedish for several years, it also have this thing in understanding how the society, and also how it resembles to the architecture, into the way of living. Does it has any correlation within the social or collective memories happen to people who are lived there for several times or in their entire life, with people who just visiting for tourism purpose, for example? How you see that these things happen? That's the first question. And the second one is about the pandemic.
The first, I thought it's like a 3 question already.
Really? Okay, then. You can answer those 3 questions. Thanks.
No, keep going. No problem.
No, yeah. I think that's my concern about the existence of people who are living in one place and maybe moving to another place, and how they can contribute to their social memories of it. And second is about the pandemic itself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mas Irfan. Looking forward to host you in Jogja, but please tell me in advance, because I'm not in Jogja yet. I'm in Gunung Kidul right now in one of the tourist places.
I thought that you also already in your home.
My house is not ready for the pandemic year. Need a lot of things. I left my house way before pandemic, and when I return back, okay, this is not the pandemic house. We need many things. Yeah, many things. All right, thank you very much for the interesting question, and it's also attract further discussion. Actually, one I want to confirm back when you mentioned about looking the creative city from the critical view. Yes, indeed, I look this phenomenon or even this concept from the critical view. And I think listening to the idea of the invitation of this forum in this class, it's also interesting for me to position myself as a kind of like conceptual provocateur. So with this critical view is actually intentional for hopefully you can get an inspiration for your own anyone here want to do a further research. So because if not, the danger in the studying creative city is actually this kind of a top-down formula. It's not just coming from our own local government. It's not even from our national government. It's actually a global issue. If you work, let's say you become an advisor from a particular city official, for example, they're also a victim of this global formula. So for us, I think this is an ethical position as a scholars, as a student, as a people who really learn from a different perspective to also contribute on a different voices. If not, then we can only just follow this kind of formula. So I think it's good if, let's say, somehow you become part of this advisory team for a particular government, then you can say something a little bit. It won't stop the Creative City program. You will contribute in that sense, but at least the program listen to the different voices. So that's my confirmation. And I like that you, Irfan, recognize that from my tone and my slide, because that's intentional as a conceptual provocateur. And then in terms of the pandemic, apologies, I don't have any enough data to say from my own data, personal data, but actually I'm currently working on a new project development, and it's about creative resilience. And I start from some of my informant. So after I formally finished, so research is never finished actually, formally finished the program, some of my informant is actually changed their profession because of they cannot, some of them actually previously sell what we call it, like hoodies made by knitting and everything, who want to buy that during this pandemic when everyone focused on the essential things, right? And then one of the collective is actually say that because they make an open gallery and in Malaysia, and during the pandemic year with the very restrictive rules in Malaysia compared to Indonesia, they also have difficulties and they cannot make any event even then. So what they do is become a hub for local food business. So they can, like, because they already built an ecosystem of a digital ecosystem for the gallery. So they use that kind of tools for doing food, helping food business in their locals and with their locals. So what I want to collect actually more data in terms of this so-called resilience, but the creative resilience rather than the social and economic resilience. I'm interested in that, how actually people change, like us in the academia, we have this kind of force resilient, right? With the changing nature of teaching, talking, doing the seminar, working with the friends in the groups, doing the assignment from the teacher, something like that. So I think I'm looking for that. But for now, I don't have any major data from my own in terms of the pandemic. I cannot even meet up with some of my informant that I initially planned because yeah, it's not safe yet to just that. And then the next question is about the idea of the different view, including the collective memories. Yes, as any other theory on the city, not the creative city, but the theory on the city itself. Why, especially the urban theories, why we call urban? Because there are heterogeneous elements within this particular space. If it is not heterogeneous in terms of the peoples, the views, the context of the movement, then it's not an urban environment. It might be just a neighborhood, or maybe it's a rural environment. So by saying urban and the name of the place itself, we can refer to it as the city. We cannot neglect or we cannot avoid the fact that there are plenty of interests, including plenty of mobilities. I just contribute to another edited volume called Mobile Socialities. It's actually written by many media scholars who come from a different view. Some of them coming from mobile communication, mobile media studies, other from cultural geography, mobility studies, and other from audience studies. So in this idea, it's interesting because this is a new theoretical arena when apart from mediation, it's also mobilities. For example, like this food delivery system, right? Beyond the technology, it's also about the idea that mobilities create different meaning. One of the chapter is actually talk about the way the city is perceived by the driver, not by the people who live. They live in the city, but their everyday experience are somehow different from us who just sit at home, working face before the screen, and maybe we go out for just for doing some errands. But from this driver, the point of view of location are become somehow different. And one of this chapter written by Magnus Andersson, it's one of the scholars in everyday life and media. He explored the idea that how actually the city somehow is similar with what Mas Irfan said. It also might be different. So how to deal with these differences? It depends. If you are a public officers like the mayor or the public officer or government staff, what I can suggest, you need to acknowledge these different views, different experience, the way people experience the city. If you are scholars, how should we deal with it? We should acknowledge them in our research. We cannot just study, okay, in this talk, in this very limited talk, my focus is only on the city dweller. I do have the data from the tourists. I also have the data from the people who live temporarily, like what you said. But since it's not the main thing that I want to say, because I want to dig deeper the city dweller itself. But actually, it could be an interesting element. And of course, it needs to be done in a different effort. From the point of view of research, we need more research to listen to how actually, for example, now I'm sitting in the district where now become a new tourist destination, right? In Jogja, with the beaches and new resort in Gunung Kidul. Every time I talk to my family member about the beaches and everything, it's just part of their daily life. It's been there. The beach has been there. But for the people who come to Jogja and then go here for 1 or 2 hours, it's actually like a new paradise or something like that. But how actually the same location or the same space can be perceived differently. So I think if we are coming from a more academic or scholars or learner, I think it needs to be done. And I think we as a teacher, university teacher, also supposed to open with the possibility of our student study. If they want to study about, I remember one of the study, it's a tiny study about the passersby, how the passersby is actually perceive their city. And a few months before I arrived in Jogja, I just finished to supervise my master student. He studied about China, and he studied about the use of graffiti in one wall in China. And in China, in the context of Chinese situation, graffiti in the wall is actually still very much very problematic. But it's interesting because it's not just a two-faced government against the activists or something like that. No, it's very chaotic because many tourists came by there because of the status of the place, and even the wall become famous, and they wrote down something that is completely out of context. It's initially become a protest against the arrest of a very critical pop singer, and somehow the government delete all the digital account of this singer, and then all the fans write it down in the wall. But after years, the wall has become like the arena itself. People write whatever they like, including their everyday life, and most of them are the passerby. According to my former student who studied that, they also found that he also assumed initially that it's always about protest. But then after he found out, well, the protest is still there, but also another layers of saying about history. And coming back to your question, Mas Irfan, about collective memory, one of them is actually wrote about the memory, a personal memory about his uncle. His uncle used to buy a candy from one store in this wall, and then how it's actually connect to another social shared memory about place, because the wall itself is being built in the context of industrial area. It used to be a very more community, and now become industrial, and then it's actually in Shenzhen. So even though it's not as big as Shanghai, he said, at least it's already starting to be into that kind of city. And then lastly, what's the last? Now I forget. I think I write down here. After this collective memory, I think that will be all. Or is there anything that I forgot?
All good, Mas. Thanks.
All good. Hope it's also addressed your question. So when will we collaborate then?
Well, actually, I have one research on social memories of Banyuwangi and Broome. So I think we can follow up through that.
Banyuwangi and
Broome. Broome, in Australia.
Oh, Broome.
Yeah, it's
So
already
like
published earlier this year. But I think I will go through into the how they assume their cities, in terms of Banyuwangi as well, people will always see Banyuwangi has this potential and have been developed very good, by the previous mayor. That continued by his wife, during this period. But before that, we know that Banyuwangi also become the place or the hub. The one that I look is about the hub of the telegraph cable, and it's not only connecting the communication, but also connecting the people, like Nokia, connecting people, and it's go through these borders in Australia, in Broome, where people still see Banyuwangi as something that they have during their previous years, or they have their memories on Banyuwangi as the connection of the telegraph cable. So by looking at how they position and also they value their cities, I think it's become more interesting into that for further collaboration. I think,
yeah, interesting. Sounds interesting. And it reminds me of two works right away. One is a very classic canonical one. It's from Rudolf Mrazek, and I think you're already familiar with that, right? I forgot the Happy Land, the Happy Land of the engineers. How to look the modernity from the point of view of the material culture, including the telegraph cable and everything. One of thing is that, and the other one is actually a new recent work. It's just based on my one of my other friends just finished his dissertation on refugee media practice and the camp, looking at the way the media practice in the in his case, in the context of the refugee, compare between the current refugee and also the refugee in the post World War II, but looking from the point of view how the memory is actually constructed from the point of view of the media practice in the refugee camp, how actually in the refugee camp they use the material culture, not just the radios, transistor, but also any kind of media, and then it becomes something that could build. I'm and he I think his name is Philip Suverling. He ever visited Indonesia in a couple of years ago, hopefully, and he looks like fine and love to revisit again if the condition permit. So if that possible, then I can happily to connect you all and see how it things. Now he worked in Södertörn University in Stockholm.
Oh, nice.
I
think I can have this point of view of how we understand the city. We cannot evade to look also about the histories, and the artifacts that has been left, that considered by people of maybe the current policymaker or the government, something that is become something that on their way. So it need to be eradicated because they need to build big malls, in giving their sense of this is something that happened during my time. So this is the building is my legacy. So I need to move all of the previous buildings, so I can have my own kind of legacy to the people. And then when it comes to other leader that come afterwards, it's also happen like that. So we have no memories that can be transferred from one people or one generation to others, because we are busy in giving our own version of buildings.
Yes.
The one that happened also in Banyuwangi, many old buildings has been destroyed because it's been suggested that it doesn't suit with the Reformation kind of thinking or futuristic kind of thinking. Like the mayor of Banyuwangi, the previous mayor, Pak Abdullah Aswar Anas, he wrote the book about the anti-mainstream marketing, 20 ways changing Banyuwangi, according to his version. But from the heritage point of view, many people protesting about his movement because he eradicated many old buildings. And when people try to give and giving key points into those buildings, into the stories from their elders about things that happened during the old times of Banyuwangi, because we know that Banyuwangi has been moved from this harbor city or previously become the hub for the Dutch colonial, something like that. So they cannot relate to that because the building is not there anymore. It has been replaced by new buildings and more kind of way of the government see about and their perspective on modernity itself.
Yeah, it's quite sad, right?
That's
right. But I think what make me sad is actually two levels. One is this kind of happening not only in Banyuwangi, Bandung, and elsewhere, but also what make me sad is actually a repetition what happened before in other places. That exactly what happened in New York in the 1960s when they create the block of this separation and segregation between areas and areas. Because at the time, it's also the mayor of New York City and also supported by the governor of New York State want to create this kind of development. Way before that, in the late 19th century in Paris, the idea of building this boulevard. Now it's become a big study. The boulevard is still there, like what Mas Irfan said, as a kind of collective memory of the failure of the urban design. Because at the time, the design to create this boulevard in that kind of, and then also boulevard, and then the main road, and then create a center, is actually to create a sense that if the center is being attacked, at least they can support or they can defend with the two card of military card. At the time, it's still used. That's exactly the initial idea, but it's ruined everything that is part of the Enlightenment civilization from the 1600 until 1700, because the urban environment suddenly become changed and suddenly become Paris what we know today, with this edifice of like the center area and then so on and so on, and then it's become hard to access. And then many other places actually learn from there and they recreate the urban planning. One of the book that really explore that is Richard Sennett book, Building and Dwelling. I think for you all can see, it's just recently published as the second edition in 2018, and plenty of cases and also experience, learning from others, learning from other failures. One of the city that also learned from the mistake made by Paris is actually Barcelona in terms of urban housing. They built the idea of urban housing not by creating segregation like in New York City, but by creating a collection of hubs. So they create because it has to be urban housing, have a plenty of space to live of a family in mostly working class situation, but at the same time it won't affect them to access other blocks. So they create a system of block, and within the block it has their own garden, it has their own playground, and it's connect to other block. And in many studies it discussed as kind of like a new approach that is better rather than the Paris way for the specific urban housing. But after 2 decades, other cities want to follow that, but forget that Barcelona have their own character as a Catalonian place. So it won't work in other place. So I believe with this case from Banyuwangi, I think this is the problem in Indonesia. We rarely appreciate data. And we never really appreciate data and archive. So every single change of mayor, of governor, or even presidents or system in general, we basically repeat anything from the beginning. So that's the hardest part. And I think that's an ethical position for all of us as a student, as a learner, as scholars, how to remind that everything is already been done, every other mistake already been done, never repeat that again. If you repeat that, you will face this consequence. And similar with this situation, not that far from Banyuwangi, I mean like Barcelona and Paris, maybe that's too far example, but I remember with the case with Lasem in Rembang in the north of central Java. They also currently want to engage with this cultural heritage issue because they also have this combination between the Arabic, the Arabic legacy and the Chinese and also the local Javanese of the what we call it, the Pantura area, the north area. And then but then also having a tension because the locals, they want to sell their old house while the cultural heritage concern organization, they want to maintain. But they cannot force people to sell because the one who want to sell is actually those who are really in the lower class of society because they need the money, because they've been prejudiced for a long time since the Suharto era as a Chinese family. So now after a generation, it's hard for them to maintain the economy. So it's created a new tension. And I think it's somehow different, of course, with the Banyuwangi case. But in that sense, now they currently plan to apply formally for the UNESCO World Heritage Site. But of course, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money. Don't forget that applying to UNESCO thing, it's not a simple one. But before we apply, I think any city need to ask the question to themselves. Do we really need that recognition or we need other thing? If we want to develop our city, if we want to attract other tourists to come to our city, do we really want that? Or we will end up like Amsterdam. The people of Amsterdam now really hate the tourists, really hate the hotel, really hate the thing because everything is ruined with the tourists, especially in the downtown. Amsterdam, it's not a big city. It's located in a very small country like the Netherlands, and suddenly attract millions of tourists. And million of tourists, and of course they can offer that, but then it's create a very chaotic way in terms of hotel. Hotel really collapsed even way before pandemic because of the business of personal hotel, like any brand and everything really changed without any regulation. They just in 2016 they realized that the local government and the city. And I remember I listened to a presentation of a colleague from Finland studying about the participation of people in planning the new Amsterdam. They used to have this slogan, I am Amsterdam, right? And they now embrace into we are Amsterdam. And we is actually a global citizen. And it based on the small program actually in many districts that involve people, including, I think it's coming back to your first question, Mas Irfan, involve not just the city dweller, but also temporary residents. Because in Amsterdam, there are plenty of students, artists doing their residency, and also some bohemian living in Amsterdam. It looks good to be in Amsterdam. And also the local city dweller, and also the villagers outside of Amsterdam, like in the surrounding area, like in Volendam and any other places. Yes, while for many other cities they face different challenges, like in Lisbon, they somehow share similar situation like us in Indonesia with the similar climate. In Lisbon, somehow it's very humid in the southern part. They do have a heritage, but rather than they create the city become the heritage site because it will create a problem, they cannot develop that. So they apply for section. So they decide to apply section of the city to the UNESCO World Heritage Site. They will not apply the city the whole, because they will maintain the business district. It will be a very financial and business district, but then they will have a heritage district as well. And tourism before the pandemic again, of course, one of the big things in Lisbon. But I now also witnessed that it's interesting. But the way the city want to respond that to avoid what happened in Amsterdam, it's also interesting. And I joined one of the urban intervention at the time. It's during remember the video mapping technique? Yeah. So they combine the technique between the cinema, video mapping, and music with the cultural heritage, and they use that. Of course, involve company and corporation, but they maintain it together with the locals because they broadcast that using a ruin that is part of the earthquake. So it's also about the collective memory of experiencing the natural disaster. So, but then now it's become another touristy, but at the same time, it's also a good tourist process, I think, because we can also learn history. We learn about collective memory that the people share, and the company that organized that is also a company. So win-win for everyone, also for the tourists like me and the researcher.
All right.
I miss. Yes, it's weird studying city without going out to the city. I miss that moment. How then we study city by looking at the Instagram post? Oh, boring.
Oh, that's a post transformation of visual memory.
I think so.
Bridging by the social media.
I want to hear about other story from other city. I love to. It's interesting to hear about Sidoarjo and then Banyuwangi and Broome in Australia. Any other story from other cities, maybe? If you don't have any specific. Well, this is an afternoon talking about concept and theory. Maybe it's too tired. But let's talk about the city itself. I mean, like, for example, I have a simple question. I have a simple question to you all. How do you feel if I said Pekalongan it's UNESCO Creative City? Do you know Pekalongan in Central Java? It's also in Pantura. And I mean, like, this city, it's now part of UNESCO Creative City. And this is the very first city that actually acknowledged by UNESCO, not Bandung, but Pekalongan. Can you imagine that? But for those who ever been in the city, you will experience that Pekalongan in the environment. I mean, like the urban environment, it's pretty much the same like Semarang, Tuban, where else? Mojokerto. But then what happened there? So I think the idea that becoming creative city, it's also become political interest, like the story in Banyuwangi, right? Okay, well,
Okay.
sorry,
Well,
I stop you, Mas
yeah.
Iga. Maybe you have question while I write this from in the
Yeah,
chat.
this is a question from Ulul. She asked about the ecotourism. What kind of the concept of ecotourism that can be used and can give the benefit for the cities? If we're talking about the cities, and what kind of ecotourism concept that can be used for the cities? Well, for example, in his area, it's about colorful villages.
Yeah.
Which change the village becoming new concept.
Yeah. No, Ulul, I will respond in both in English and Indonesian for all the audience here. But in general, ecotourism, of course, if we refers to the very meaning of eco, which means ecological concern and ecological friendly, ecotourism, normatively speaking, especially nowadays, it has to be based on anything sustainable, because it's also part of our SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 13, creating a city that is sustainable, including in tourism. So that's the simple answer. The hardest part is how to create the sustainable. And with your example on the just painting the village into colorful, that's not ecotourism yet. Maybe that's just part of an activity. But to create an ecotourism, it's not just the sustainability in terms of using the material, the physical, but also sustainable in, if we understand sustainable as a concept and also as a practical approach in managing society. It's also about the idea that we think about long-term impact rather than short-term impact. Most of the tourism approach and tourism practice is always dealing with the short-term impact, whether it's a profit, whether it's just a branding, whether it's just a political term or administration. Long-term impact, it's hard to be drawn. I remember long time ago when I was still working as a facilitator of post-disaster trainer and facilitator in many villages. I worked there at the time in Aceh after the tsunami, as well as in Jogja after the earthquake and the volcanic eruption here. And in many other villages, after years after the natural disaster, the idea that they want to change their livelihood into tourism, it's one of the lucrative idea. They want to embrace that. But then during the training, we usually remind the people by digging the idea from them first. What do you want? What exactly you look for? If it is just a short-term goal to return the livelihood and then get the money quick, that would be a problem, because then that will be a consequences that have a long term. So rather than doing that, let's think about long-term aspect. Oh, you want to change your livelihood. It will affect the whole village. If they used to raise cattle, chicken, and other agricultural aspect, now the whole village will change doing tourism. Are you ready? We think about that. Ask not only the men in the village, but also the women in the village, because it will have an impact on the family. And women also need to be heard, their voice. This is also an aspect on gender representativeness. And then we always try to remind them long term, even though at the end of the day, they decided to do the tourism activity, which is fine, as long as they realize that it is about the long term. They will have a structural change in the village. That will be a new profession among themselves. And if they used to have a gathering in the evening after the half day of working in the kebun, in the field, And then once you do the tourism, you cannot gather every particular evening, because then you might have a guest. You might have something to do to prepare for tomorrow, a guest. And then it changed the structural aspect, especially the cultural situation and also the political tension. And the mother in the house have also somehow more roles and more responsibility. And do the father or the man in the family want to share their role as well? Then that kind of thing that we discuss. And I think coming back to the idea of sustainability in tourism, including ecotourism, I think that idea need to be done. So I don't have a formula, and I don't like the formula to address you, Ulul. Jadi kalau boleh saya ringkaskan, ekoturisme yang baik ya harus berkelanjutan, sustainable. Nah, sustainable tidak hanya soal penggunaan aspek-aspek material yang ramah lingkungan, itu baru tingkat awal saja. Apalagi hanya mengecat rumah-rumah warga menjadi kampung kelir. Nah, itu kan saya sedang menulis artikel tentang kritik terhadap itu. Tapi takut juga nanti dikritik balik sama warga. Nggak apa-apa lah. Jadi ekowisata dimanapun itu, kita harus berpikir jangka panjang, tujuannya jangka panjang. Katakanlah Ulul menjadi penasehat di kampung atau di kampung lain atau di program KKN. Yuk kita bikin ekowisata. Nah, saran saya yang lebih diperhatikan, bikin wisatanya bisa bentuk apapun, wisata budaya, wisata pendidikan, wisata teknologi, macam-macam, wisata simulasi sekarang juga ada kan, wisata simulasi seperti di beberapa kota di Jepang. Nah, tapi diajak warga untuk bicara juga, kita bicara jangka panjang, goal yang jangka panjang. Kalaupun di jangka pendek tampaknya pendapatan warga atau desa tak terlalu cepat, banyak, jangan khawatir, diingatkan terus, ini demi jangka panjang. Jangka panjang itu apa? Perubahan struktural di masyarakat itu. Especially if it is about the desa wisata atau village culture. Because sometimes what I witness in Jogja itself, some of them is actually good in terms of desa wisata, because they can, this is another indicator whether our initiative to create ecotourism or tourism in the city or whatever the name is, that the indicator is not about how many income we can gain in the short term, not even how many income in the long term, because this is not a business model. One of the indicator that we can realize is actually how big or how deep the participation of the people, whether the people living in the village or the people who will help from afar, from outside, and also the participation of the tourists. And I also noticed in some of desa wisata here who really work, the idea that from the point of view of the village, sometimes they also get good idea and progress from the tourists. We cannot assume that tourists is always make a problem, right? Sometimes they can also develop a mutual understanding. That's what we witnessed in Ubud since 200 years ago, right? What happened in Ubud since I forgot his name, the one who introduced dance and eventually become tari kecak. Correct me if I'm wrong, Beli Iga. Tari kecak, it's not just a simple traditional finding. It's a process of cosmopolitan between this German artist coming from German to be a teacher from a kingdom of Jogja, and then he fall in love in Bali and then create a collaboration with the local artists at the time in the late 1800s. And then it's become a new collaboration, and now we call it Tari Kecak as part of this cosmopolitan collaboration. And that exactly the idea of ecowisata, I would say, not by the intention to become touristy object, but how the participation of people, whether they're coming from afar, whether they are the local people, they can create a mutual dialogue and they can create something. And I think, and we do believe that as a product, Tari Kecak in Bali is a very much a creative product, but beyond that, it's also a good process, historically speaking, from this mutual dialogue and collaboration between different people, different elements, and then they build the process together. So I think that kind of, hopefully this answers your question, Ulul, not in a formula type, but it's also attract you to create initiative differently in different place. Ya, semoga menjawab, Ulul, dan menginspirasi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mas. It's so comprehensive and so interesting as well. But if we still have time, could you please, anyone who has a questions, feel free.
Is it already Maghrib in Surabaya?
Yeah, Maghrib in Surabaya. Yeah. Feel free to do if you. Okay, Fawzan, silakan.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Glad to have a really good discussion and material from Dr. Zaki.
Habibi, just call me Zaki. Just call me Zaki.
So, I'm interested to what happened like recently about what is called the halal city tourism.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that? It's meant like right now, like to be kind of it's not just a gap, but multiculturalism. Like the aspect of it is so broad, right?
Yeah.
The issue. I mean, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good, also another good question coming from you, and it's also a debatable. I will give you a little bit context, especially to those who are not familiar with the concept of halal. It's the Islamic term in terms of which one is a law and which one is not. The halal and haram, it's part of the Sharia, but then it slip on into the milieu and the psyche of the society after halal become a discourse rather than the Islamic Sharia anymore. So then it's become, to me, it's also become another political economy subject, because then, as we know, Indonesia as the most populous Muslim country in the world, it's become also say something about market. So that's where it starts. If we are not the most populous country, the most populous Muslim country in the world, maybe there would be no such a thing as this kind of a discourse. That's where it happened. So now the idea of halal, of course, for the supporter of this, I don't have any against on it. So this is recorded, right? So I don't have any against on the idea of this as a Sharia. This is not about Sharia. So what is actually happened nowadays is about the idea that this halal, informed from the Islamic practice and Islamic belief, somehow has a correlation with the scale of market that potentially can be made. And remember, including the creative city and any kind of creative, why we move our attention to the creative and creativity, because the other or the so-called all subject are no longer work in economic development. That's why we tend to see other things. And halal as a discourse, not as a Sharia or Islamic belief, become that kind of thing. From the point of view, not my field, but from other fields called political economy atau ekonomi politik, usually people will see this as a kind of commodification, coming from a two word, commodity and modification. How we can modify things into commodity. Of course, as a commodity, it's something that has an economic, tangible aspect. So if we notice from the campaign in any cities or any place, halal tourism, halal hotel, what else? Halal beach, right? Or any kind of other, or halal market and halal fintech, financial technology business, and so on. So I think, even though I should speak on my subjective position, I myself belong to the Muslim communities, but in this regard, I also have a critical view, because it's not a matter of another Sharia again. It's a matter of this community, and it's become commodification. And to those who, whether they support or not, but they see the benefit, they will of course support it. But we have to move backward, whether we belong to this community or the belief. I'm not a Islamic scholar myself, even though I'm coming from the affiliation of the university. I myself don't have the authority to say that. So it's not a matter of the what type of the Islamic belief or Islamic practice that is, but it's a matter of the market, and there is a potential market here. Well, from the point of view of the developmentalist scholars and also the developmentalist urban planner, whether they believe or not in this Islamic belief, they usually support this idea because it's a good timing and it's a good market. But from the point of view of the cultural and critical point of view, like what my position, I usually have more skeptical, not criticizing, but more skeptical, because the idea somehow become more, what we call it in English, they become latah. What we call it in Malaysia, we call it melata. Melata means I'm losing.
Can we call it Me Too? Oh no, it's just
no.
It's not a movement. It's not a movement.
Like something that we just epigon. Everything is just following others. Like in the movie, right? In the films, we just become an epigon. So I think some of the initiative is actually good, because the idea that, remember, for the Muslim communities, when they want to go into the hotel or anything in the city, they usually have this kind of anxiety of whether this place is really good or not, whether the place is really clean in terms of their Sharia and so on. So I think that's also actually addressed the need of the people. Back to the city for the people, it's also the people we talk about here. But after it's become a business, a lucrative business, of course, many other player and actor want to jump to get benefit from this discourse. That's the very problem. So I think the very problem, it's not the term or the concept itself, the halal or halal as part of the, even as a discourse, but the idea that many actors that actually don't really care about the Islamic belief or Islamic concern is actually jump together into this because there is a big market. Just make the number, count the mathematicals, and it's simple. If the pandemic already quite controlled, then we can calculate how many people movement, whether for tourism, for education, for anything, and you can calculate 80 or 75. So I don't have the figure now, but around 80% of the population belong to this community, and of course they will say no, because okay, this is good. But at the same time, also, we can, from the point of view of academic work, we need to be more skeptical, but also awareness. Because I also, even from the point of view of a Muslim community, somehow it's become, really trivial in some sense. How, for example, I'll give you an example. How come that, what we call it, when we ironing the clothes, then we need a spray to help it, and then it has a label of halal. How, for me, coming from the Muslim community, what's the idea? I will not eat that. I will not put anything on my mouth, and it's not part of that. To me, it's kind of like something that is really go beyond the substance. So similar with the ecotourism or any other initiative in any cities, we need to see move back one step or two steps to see whether this initiative need to be continued and it's really address the substance of the people. If so, let's continue and be consistent with that. If not, then this is just a commodification, and we have to be aware with that. Hope it's also addressed. But I hope it won't stop your business, Fauzan. If you have a business in halal business, keep going and keep continue. That will be good. Business.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you, Fauzan. We still have 15, 20 minutes to have this discussion. If you still have, something in mind, the ideas you need to share, feel free to drop your question in the chat box or raise your hand to ask the question directly to Mas Zaki. While waiting for some question, I have some interesting point, Zaki. It's about the idea of cities, heritage cities, creative industries, and also how they transform that kind of idea to be kind of a short-term visual memories by having the cities, just like Ulul example is by making it more colorful, or in other some cities is make the cities look different by having some signs, symbols, or colors and things. It's kind of short-term memory, but this kind of idea, it works, by it helps by or bridged by the social media, making them more Instagrammable, making them memorable.
Instagrammable.
Yeah. So what do you think about this trend?
We can see from 2 point of view of the social actor. One from the point of view of back, since it is about the city. Let's see from the city point of view in terms of the city official or city urban planner. From that point of view is actually another idea of what we call in the urban studies as placemaking. I don't really have any hesitation or against to this concept, because as a concept it's actually neutral, because the idea is how we can create a place that used to have one single meaning into more multiple meanings. That's the original idea of placemaking. But in any situation, sometimes placemaking is only have one ideas that is actually how to make money from this place. And then the kind of idea, I have a exact example not far from here. There is a farmer who planted the flowers here in Gunung Kidul, and a couple years ago, I think 2 years before or 3 years before pandemic, it became famous because one family stopped there and then took a pictures in Instagram, and suddenly everyone just came there, and then they ruined the plan, of course, by taking the pictures. And then after years, the local villagers realized, oh, there is a money potential here. Let's make the place. Yeah. So rather than just plant the flowers for general purposes, they openly come here, park your car, pay it, take a pictures. So I will talk from the point of view of the second, which is the people. From the point of view of the city, coming back to there is actually a part of placemaking. It depends. Placemaking is a nice thing if we actually reinvent the new meaning of a place. And most of the time is actually for an old building, old district that used to be like no one want to passing their area, and then suddenly become a new place without new construction or anything. That's a good placemaking. It happened in Liverpool, for example, in 2008, when they become a European cultural capital. So every year, European countries choose one city to become European cultural capital, and they usually get the funding and everything to rename, rebrand and everything. At the time, rather than they build a major big thing in Liverpool, they focus on supporting local communities. So they don't build major things, because when other city become like 2 years ago, or sorry, 2019, yes, 2 years ago, Gothenburg is a European cultural capital, or 2004, Malmö in Sweden, they build infrastructure, they build thing, and it failed afterward because it's only. But in Liverpool, in the UK, they use the funding and the local government money, and also supported by a corporation, to support local communities, including a group of readers, a group of book reading club, and knitting, and an elderly group or something like that. And then they open the door for the tourists, they open the door for it. So they want to have an exchange of dialogue. Some activity create a ticket, some others are actually free. So, and it's interesting because after the label of that, people forget that Liverpool is European cultural capital, but people remember the place. That's kind of a placemaking that is interesting. And I think in many smaller cases, it also happened elsewhere here in Indonesia. I found also a few examples in Jogja. Maybe it's not part of the big program that they realize, but actually they do a good placemaking. That's from the point of view who own the place or who run the place. But from the point of view of the people, this is also interesting. We, as a media scholars or media learner, we used to think of with prejudice. Taking an Instagram, taking a selfie is always a bad thing. Yes, at some point, if you fall to the cliff and then you create problem for others to help you out. But it actually have a different angles. Coincidentally, the last 2 weeks in my class, in my teaching about the subject on media theory, I just explain about the theory of media logic, and 2 theories of it is mediation, and the other one is also about mediation and using an example of selfie. And that's from the point of view of psychologists, especially behavioral psychologists, sociologists. They tend to see selfie as a bad practice, narcissistic, and other thing. Yes, indeed, during the early years of selfie, maybe. But then from the point of view of more complex, and us, since we study communication and media, we shouldn't follow that. We should dig deeper. And many other, like Katrin Tidenberry, is from Finland, if I'm not mistaken, write a book about selfie action, selfie and all the cultural impact of it. She explore the variety of meanings from the people who did that. And it's quite interesting because it also have a different voice, and it's actually temporality also. For some, it's about visibility. She used the concept visibility. Visibility is always deal with power. Those who cannot do those who choose to do the selfie, some of them, I think it's also, Mas Irfan is no longer here. I think I remember from his doctoral study on the migrant worker, visibility is also one key important element. Using the media, whatever to do it, including doing the selfie, it's also part of showing the power relation. That's for one concept. Other concept, it's about visuality. Visuality, it's about what we can see and what we cannot see. But the problem is who say that. In the general social structure is always our super ego and our social structure. Our parents say no to this. Our teachers say no to this. Our decan, what did decan say no to this? And then our rector and so on and so structure. Selfie is actually trespassing this visuality by saying we define what we can show, what we cannot show. So the ideas of selfie and the place become Instagrammable or doing that is actually have different meaning. And we cannot have one single prejudice anymore, I would say. So I think rather than we make a short or jumping conclusion by saying, oh, they just do the Instagrammable thing in these new places and places. They don't really understand the history or the cultural memory or here. Wait, pause. Why don't we ask them if we are researchers? Why don't we dig deeper? Maybe they just want to do. I have a very personal experience in this. This is not part of a field research. It's actually part of my, it's just part of my urban walking research with a friend. And suddenly we stopped, and my friend asked me to take his selfie in Copenhagen with the sign of his brother's name. Can you take me here? And I want to show this my brother. And then why? His brother is actually as a terminally ill, and then he had a chance to visit Europe. He's Indonesian, of course, and he want to say gratitude, and he want that his brother who were terminally ill be there with him, take the selfie, and then after that take a Wi-Fi with me. And then I was feeling weird at the time because I only know him, but I didn't know his brother. But then a year later, I got a text from him, my friend, now living in Prague in the Czech Republic. And then he texts me with that particular pictures and with one line, my brother just passed away. Thank you for taking that pictures in Copenhagen. He really liked it. And he said that many times before he passed away. That's the human story. If we put the prejudice at the time, if I put the prejudice, why we took a selfie here? It's a very touristy place in Copenhagen. I feel unease, and it's not fine, and I don't want to look like a tourist. But then since I ask and since I listen and I follow, the story of his selfie is somehow very, very deep, and I cannot deny that. And it has a human story behind it. So coming back to this, I think it's already too far from the idea of creative city. But going back to this, we cannot just put a prejudice to anything in one single side. Maybe there would be that kind of things, but maybe there will be other human stories, especially if we deal with the human practices. Instagrammable sport and taking selfie for the Instagram, it has different meaning. For those who are really interested about the study on Instagram, Crystal Abidin, I think you know her, right? She used to be based in Curtin as well, in Perth.
Still,
still.
Yeah.
Yes, she's been everywhere. I think in one of her recent work, she wrote together with her colleague, part of her postdoc project, I think, and she wrote a book specifically on Instagram, full stop, from the point of view of course, media and communication studies, not from the technology. And the whole study of this, the use of Instagram, the way the feature behind the story, behind the curtain, and even the particular chapter about filter. She dedicated that, I think, sub-chapter, I think not the whole chapter, but sub-chapter about filter and how it has an implication on the meaning, the way people relate with place, the way people relate with self. So yeah, I think that kind of combination between understanding placemaking from the idea of owner or authority of the place, or everyday practice from the people. We cannot say. Oh, coming back, I will close this statement by coming back to my example in here and close by here. The owner of the field, who own the field now, they play out this kind of people reaction. Oh, they want to come here to take a pictures. Well, I will provide that. But now he created the line, so people will not ruin the plan while they pay the money. I think that's a good placemaking initiative, a very local placemaking one from his point of view. And the people come and they create a new behavior, because it used to be chaotic and everything. Now they want to follow the path line and they take a pictures in a dedicated spot, and they look happy and they continue the journey while paying the small amount of money for the parking line and everything. And also owner sell drinks, of course, because it's a very hot place. People will stop by and then I need the drink. That's a good way. That's creative, I think.
True.
All right. It's already Maghrib here.
Yeah, we're here. Thank you very much.
If
you have any question, just please send me the question. I will pass to Zaki, of course. And thank you everyone for attending these classes. And thank you, Zaki.
Oh, yes,
for giving
my
us
pleasure.
a very insightful presentation.
Sure.
I hope you don't mind if we invite you again.
Yeah, we can talk about other things, maybe beyond the creative city.
Yeah.
Method maybe, or other things. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I'm pretty much looking forward to have the chance to see you all in person in Surabaya, maybe at some point in the near future.
That's kind of we lost.
Or
2 years.
Come to Jogja. But not now, because I cannot know how to treat in this situation now. But again, my pleasure, and also thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your kind attention and lovely question and discussion and engaging topic to be discussed further. Hopefully from the beginning, as I said to Mas Irfan earlier, I hope I can somehow create a small inspiration for you all with whatever you're interested in. So you can kind of create, whether in academia or whether outside of academia, for your own benefit in the short term or long term of your study. Terima kasih sekali. Selamat.
Oke, selamat. Terima kasih. Selamat sore. Selamat malam.
Ya,
tetap sehat. Sampai ketemu lagi. Saya akhiri kelas ini.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.